Hey guys, Matthew here. In today's video, what I want to bring to you guys is basically an update on all of the League starter builds that I prepared. So all four of them, I have Winter Miner, General Cry Berserker, Reap Miner, and Seismic Trapper. And what I've done essentially is I've prepared some more high-end, like mid-budget and of course end-game POBs for all four of those builds. So for you guys who are playing any of these builds and are like, I've kind of reached this point where the POB ended. I don't know where to go. Well, this is going to be a way to tell you exactly what's going on. So you can use the timestamps to go to your specific build that you chose if you want to know what I've actually done with the POB. Because what I'm going to do is actually, I'm just going to go over the changes really quickly for each of the builds. But the POBs are all going to be in the description, so if you're a little bit more of an advanced player and you don't really care, you can just grab the POB and off you go. For those who are interested in knowing what I've changed, and of course the changes to the stats, be it damage, survivability wise, I've basically increased damage and survivability on every one of those builds. Obviously, when you invest more budget, you start having more options. So especially the General Cry one, the survivability went through the roof with some of the changes that I've made, and damage is pretty similar as well. Alright, so let's get right into it. Eye of Winter. So Eye of Winter started off at around 2.9 million damage, and this was with 55 range. And of course with 4 projectiles overlapping, which is a pretty reasonable amount. So realistically, we were actually doing quite a bit more than this on this budget, but that's what the POB said, about 2.9 mil, and we were rocking about 4.3k life and 24,000 evasion. So it was already a pretty good build with this level of budget. I killed Shaper, I killed Uber Elder, I killed even Cyrus Wickedr level 8. With this POB, because this is the League starter that I went with. So I was pretty happy with it, but then of course comes the end game, and we have over tripled the damage here, I believe. We are sitting at, or not quite triple the damage, but we're sitting at 8.4 million instead of the 2.9, so quite a bit of increase in damage. We are now level 93, so I've increased the levels on all the POBs slightly. But mostly what we're getting is just additional life, so there's not too much going on. The tree stayed relatively the same. However, one thing that I've realized as I was playing the build with the changes to the mana reservation efficiency and stuff, I realized that mana was a bit of a problem. So I decided to grab this mana mastery here, and what this allows us to do also is to get a chance to recover 10% mana when you use a skill. So mines are considered skills, so every 10 mines that you're throwing, you'll recover 10% of your mana. So this essentially means that you are not going to need a mana flask for boss fights. Now, I would still recommend using a mana flask. It's still a great a tool for a miner character, but this is basically going to save you in those situations where you're like, I've got no mana, what am I going to do? This is going to come in really clutch. So big fan of this node. I highly underestimated its value earlier on in the build. Now looking at the items, I'm not going mirror tier on any of this stuff. This is still going to stay relatively budget. We're looking at +1 cold, a little bit of cold damage. Now note that this 48% cold damage could also be 48% spell damage. I just put cold because everybody knows about spells. Some people forget about cold. So that's what's up. Eye of Winter damage is the enchant that we're going for. You could also go for frequency. Frequency is going to help you more with clear. Meanwhile, damage is going to help you more with single target. Because the frequency essentially is as the projectile is spinning, the Eye of Winter, it's shooting out these little projectiles. Well, those are going to come out faster, so it's going to help you with clearing. But of course, if we're going for just pure single target, we are going to go with the Eye of Winter damage. Skin of the Loyal is our new chest piece, which is basically a tabula, except we are going to go with +2 socketed gem. What this does for us is that it also gives us 100% increased global defenses, which applies to our evasion that we're running on this build. Now, the gloves have changed a little bit. We are going to go with the culling and unnerved gloves. Now, culling is not included in the DPS, so we've actually just about tripled their damage, including culling, because that's another 10%, I believe. And then, of course, unnerved is what we're going for. Now, I don't think that unnerved works with mines. And this is why you will want elevated unnerved, because elevated unnerved gives you unnerved enemies for 4 seconds on hit. Meanwhile, the non-elevated gives you 10% chance. So you want the elevated version, because then as soon as you put down your Arcanist brand, then that is you and you are hitting. Therefore, it is actually going to basically instantly unnerve the enemy, and you're not going to have any sort of RNG to it. If you get the 10% chance, well, you know, there's a chance that you're not going to get maximum value out of this. Zero Step is still our go-to, but we're going to get the enchant critical strike chance if you haven't crit recently. We never crit. We are using mines, which is not us. Therefore, this is always up. And of course, we're not really hitting with anything other than Hydrosphere, and it doesn't pulse that fast because we don't have that much cast speed. And typically, you shouldn't really be putting your Hydrosphere within the range of the boss anyways to maximize DPS. It should be slightly off. So this should be up at all times. Our amulet of choice is going to be a +1 cold, +1 int. So this is just an Awakener's Orb. If you can get some crit multi, great. Life is obviously going to be what we're looking for, but if you don't have an open prefix, the craft to go for is going to be Mine Throwing Speed. This is going to help quite a bit. And then, of course, we have Snake Pit and Res on Res Ring and Res Belt. Nothing's changed in terms of our jewels. We're still rocking single multi-jewels. Now, I know that my overlay might be hiding stuff, but as you can see, it's still just one single multi and life, so nothing crazy in terms of the jewel budget either. We're looking at a few chaos. Now, if you want to go further than this, this is when you would start to look at, for example, a +4 skin of loyal or +3, and of course, double multi-jewels and all that good stuff. But for the most part, this is kind of what we're looking at, and I'm not sure why, but my cluster's gone. So yeah, that's pretty much what's going on with Eye of Winter. So this is going to allow you to do the Feared very easily. Maven, just walk through it completely. It's going to be a blast, and the budget is still not absolutely incredible either. So pretty good stuff. All right, next let's look at General Cry. There were a few problems with the General Cry build. The first one was mana problems. I kept hearing people talking about mana problems, and I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. Why was there mana issues? And the thing is, we had a node, I believe, right here or right there, which was giving us 0.4% of damage leech as mana, I believe, and that's gone. And I didn't realize that when making the POB, or maybe it was somewhere else, I don't know, but we had some sort of mana leech somewhere, and now it's like here, I believe, and this is way too far. So the easy way to fix that was to get a Kitava's Teachings, because of course Mana Flask is great, but if you run out of charges, what do you do? Right, so Kitava's Teachings is going to be our go-to, but looking at the stats on the budget version, we were rocking about 10 million or 11 million DPS, 4.6k life, 15,000 armor, so it was not a horrible build, of course, especially in terms of damage. That was pretty insane considering the build and the gear on there, but of course, with the endgame setup, we are absolutely going bonkers on this one. We've more than quadrupled the damage. We are sitting at a 45 million DPS. Now, of course, this is also not with crazy endgame, GG gear. For example, this Paradoxica is physical and attack speed, which is great, but you could also have, instead, you could have, say, attacks, or physical and impale, which would save you some nodes on the tree, stuff like that. Now, that being said, this Paradoxica does have quality on it, which is something that's completely gone from the game. So let me go ahead and just remove that real quick. I completely forgot that they removed Paradoxica quality. So this is no longer going to be available. It's just going to give you some stats instead, which attributes are not bad on this build either. So this is kind of what we're going to be looking at. But as you can see, our damage barely moved whatsoever. And this is something that you can get even right now. All right, so of course we're going to use Red Blade Banner. Abyssus is going to be the go-to. Now, one thing that I will say is if you're struggling in maps and your survivability is like you're just falling over and over again, that's because of Abyssus, right? You're taking 40% increased physical damage on top of your ascendancy of Aspect of the Carnage. That is normal. If you're not positioning yourself properly and just running into packs like you were a tank, well, you're going to die. That's just the way this build works. So removing Abyssus for just a life rare, a rare, which is a bunch of life and a bunch of armor, is probably going to be your go-to. However, I've changed this POB to be significantly tankier than it was, so Abyssus might no longer be a problem once you switch over to this build, or to this version. So we're still rocking a bare bones chest piece, no crazy elevated mods. You could go with attacks crits is what you would go for. So hunters with attacks have base critical strike chance. This would help you with crits. We don't have a ton of crit on this build. We're still rocking the Hands of the High Templar with base crit attack speed. You could go with Vuln on hit here, and this would actually bring your damage up a lot. But if you went with Vuln on hit on your gloves, you would actually have to get a chest piece with +1 curse. In order to be able to apply both of those curses. The boots, I've gotten the enchant increased critical strike chance if you haven't crit recently. This is not going to be up at all times, so it's not in the POB settings. I have crit recently in the POB settings, but if you haven't, it's a pretty big boost of DPS. You know, so because we are releasing at 6 stages on this POB, you know, that one extra crit could be the difference between a boss getting one-shot and not one-shotted, so that's why I put this in here. But you could also get regen. The enchant on the boots is not that big of a deal for this build. What is a pretty big deal, however, is getting the base crit on the gloves, and then, of course, if you can get it on the armor. But now we're starting to look at some pretty endgame stuff. All right, High Year's Truth. Now, High Year's Truth is amazing because it gives you precision, has, you know, 100% reservation efficiency or whatever, which is pretty good. And, of course, it also gives you level 22 precision. It gives you a bunch of dexterity, which is really hard to get for the 212 for Paradoxica. And it also gives you some flat physical damage and some crit multi and even some leech. Like, this amulet is amazing. Panopticon is going to be our note of choice. Of course, we're rocking an Assassin's on hit ring, Assassin's Mark as we used to, and just some life and res ring. Very important that we get the channeling cost to and the non-channeling cost, both of them, to, you know, get our mana cost to a much more reasonable level. But as you can see, I've fixed the mana a lot on this POB. That was a priority because a lot of people were telling me about the mana issues. So what I've done is I've added this jewel here called Kataba's Teaching, which adds Disciple of Kataba. Recover 5% life and mana every second. So your General Cry should be General Crying about every second, or even less than that. So this should basically be covering all your mana issues by itself. And it's just costing you 1 point in a jewel socket, so it's not too big of a deal. Now, the other change that I've made to really boost the survivability of this build is I've given up some damage. I gave up some damage here. I gave up some more damage somewhere else. I can't quite remember. But as you can see, this POB is level 96. Now, I can hear you already saying, Matt, I'm not level 96. This build dies all the time. I'm stuck at level 90, 91, 92. So here is what I would recommend doing. These nodes right here, just drop them. Okay, it's a lot of damage that you're going to be dropping if you give up these nodes. But this is level 89, so this is where you would finish the tree around here, and then you would grab all this, and then after that, you would grab all this, and that would bring you to the 96. This is more important than that, all right? So this would be my recommendation. But what I've done to fix the mana issues and the survivability issues, a 2-in-1, is I grabbed this mastery for determination, and then I grabbed all of this mana reservation stuff with a 15% mana there, and then I grabbed Dread Banner, has 100% mana reservation efficiency there. And by throwing on this, this, and this, what I've been able to do is actually add on determination to the build and still have a reasonable 59 unreserved mana, which should still be plenty to be able to use General Cry and Cyclone and everything else that you need to use, especially because Disciple of Kataba will keep you topped off on your mana. So that is basically the state of this build. The damage is through the roof. I mean, you don't really need any more than this. 40 million damage, basically. You're killing Shaper in 2 seconds. You're killing Maven in a single second. You are basically going to walk up to the boss and they're just going to disappear. We're talking about 2 seconds per boss in a juiced up feared encounter. It's absolutely insane, this level of damage. There's no reason to go further than that. But if you want to, then you're on your own. Remember what I said about the base crit on the chest piece and stuff like that. You've got a few options in terms of damage. And in terms of survivability, look at that. 59,000 armor compared to the 15,000 that we had before. Determination is really busted. So that is going to keep us alive and make sure that Abyssus doesn't get us killed all the time because of that increased physical damage taken. As you can see, we're rocking 90% physical damage. If I go under the calculations here, our effective hit pool is 200k, but that is not actually true. Because if our big hits are coming in, that's against small hits. But within big hits, so let's say I put a hit of 10,000 damage, you'll see that our effective health pool is about, or physical health pool is about 60k. So we can take a massive hit, right? We can take a hit of 49,000 maximum hit taken when it comes to physical damage before we actually drop dead. So that is pretty impressive on a General Cry build. So really happy that I went with that change. I think that you guys who are right now having issues with both mana and dying all the time, once you swap to this, you are going to have a really good time. And the thing is, there's nothing you really need to do on your POB in order to be able to swap to this. The only thing you have to do is give up some of the damage nodes and grab all of the mana reservation stuff so that you can put determination on the build. So again, huge there. Of course, we were going to go with a Watcher's Eye at this point. This is kind of where the build starts to be real endgame. Impale Watcher's Eyes, single stat, still pretty good. 16% damage is what we're getting out of this, but of course it's not mandatory at all. So that's kind of the situation with General Cry. So I hope you guys are having a much better time with this version of the build because it's significantly tankier. Okay, now let's look at the Reap Miner. So the Reap Miner started off at about 4.8 million DPS. On the middle investment, it was sitting at 6.5 million DPS, and it was sitting at 4K life. So I haven't really worked out too much on the Reap Miner, but I have gotten a lot more DPS out of the build. As you can see, it's sitting at a 15 million DPS. Every single hit of your Reap is doing 2.4 million DPS, and we are investing quite a bit into area of effect with Carcass Jack and with these nodes over here. So your Reap, if we go under calculations, check this out. Your Reap has some massive AoE. Look at that. That's like half your screen for a single Reap, and it is pretty juiced. I've also fixed up there were some slight mana issues on this build from what I had looked at the old POB, especially, but otherwise there's not too much. There's not too much that has changed on this POB other than the build itself. So rocking 2 cold iron points. We're getting a +1 blood charge on our helmet, which is 15% more damage. Pretty busted. Carcass Jack +2 duration is what we're going to go for because Reap has the duration tag. You could also go with +2 AoE. That would also work. Next, we are going to go with, of course, the Culling Unnerved Gloves. Same situation as the Reap Miner. You are not going to ever apply this Unnerved. That being said, because we have a Arcanist brand which is hitting very quickly, right, with Reap, we could actually go with unelevated Unnerved and save a good chunk of currency if we wanted to. So you don't actually have to go with the elevated Unnerved for this specific build. We're also going to go with the crit chance, what's it called? Boot enchant. This is always going to be up. Of course, when your Reap does crit, like your own Reap, you're going to lose that. But the thing is, this is not going to crit very often because we don't have a lot of crit chance. We have a lot of crit chance with mines. So it's not as big of a deal. The uptime should be pretty decent. We're going to go with a +1 strength, +1 physical with crit multi amulet. With mine throwing speed is going to be our go-to enchant. My God, I can't speak. +1 strength and +1 physical with mine throwing speed is going to be our go-to when it comes to the amulet. There's no enchant going on here. It's just a base craft. If you can get the crit multi, go for it. Otherwise, don't. The mine throwing speed is going to be a lot more valuable than the critical strike multiplier, especially when it comes to the feels goodness of the build. Otherwise, so essentially the strength and physical is because Reap is a physical and spell duration tagged, right? So Reap, be it a red gem, is strength, and because it has the physical tag, we can get +2 from the amulet, which is really big in terms of our damage. As you can see, compared to the old amulet, that's a 14% damage increase for basically an Awakener's Orb. So pretty good there. Going with a Mark of the Shaper, of course, with an Elder Ring to get that increased, that juicy 88% spell damage if your other ring is an Elder, and then we're just going to go life and res through and through. The rest of the POB hasn't changed much. I've gotten it to level 94, however, because I think that's a pretty reasonable level, but all I've did essentially is added these nodes over here. So if you're not level 94, right, let's say you're level 90, 91, just go ahead and drop these nodes over there. This is going to be your endgame stuff. It does boost your critical strike chance up a lot, but it's not going to be a make or break in terms of how the build feels. So that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of this build. So again, pretty happy with the changes that I've made here. The mana, you've got about 47 mana unreserved, and of course your Reap is costing life, and your Reap on Arcanist Brand is also costing life. So you don't really need a whole lot of mana on this build available. You need mana for Bear Trap, and you need mana for basically Assassin's Mark, and that's basically it. So this should be plenty of mana to go around. Alright, and finally, looking at the Seismic Trap build, we started off with, I believe it was 5.5 million DPS on Seismic with 4 overlaps, and then on the middle investment, we were at 9 million with about 4.3k life. Reasonable levels of mana because, of course, Seismic is costing life because we use Life Tap, and so is our Exsanguinate, so there was never any real mana issues on this build. But going to the little bit more endgame POB, we have boosted our damage up to about 13 million, so a pretty reasonable increase. And as you can see, the gear is roughly the same. 2 cold iron points. We're getting +1 seismic enchant. Now, this is a huge deal. For those who don't know what the enchant does, an additional wave is an additional little explosion. So the way that seismic works is that there's the big explosion in the middle, right? That's like pumping, and it's pumping these little explosions. So if you look under calcs, you can actually visually see this. You can see that there is the secondary radius, and then there's the primary radius, which is, yeah, radius here. So this is the primary radius, right, which is your big explosion, and then the secondary is all the small ones that are going on. The enchant is going to make it so you get an additional one of those little small one, which means better overlap, better clear, more damage. Next, we're going to go with a Carcass Jack, because AoE scales incredibly well on this build. We are going to go with Trap and Mine, of course, on the gloves, so that we can run Exsanguinate in there for a pseudo 5-link. We're going to go with the crit chance enchant on the boots, as we do. And this is another one of a little bit of a change. On the amulet, we're going to go with +1 dex, +1 fizz. Now, this is not going to apply to Reap, but it will apply to Seismic Trap. So that's a pretty big boost of damage. As you can see, it's about 13% more damage per hit than before, but it's about 8% total damage. Now, if you're wondering why it's not as much as, for example, the other build, it's because of the trap throwing speed that we lost. Now, if you had a really good amulet, right, and let's just say you didn't craft life, instead you just had some actual life on the amulet. Now, this, of course, now we're starting to look at some pretty endgame stuff, and then you just crafted the trap throwing speed, the damage would actually be pretty ridiculous here. As you can see, this is kind of where we're going to get that plus 20% damage from the amulet. But I want a little bit more budget here. But again, trap throwing speed is our go-to. Mark of the Shaper also our go-to with a Elder Topaz Ring to get that juicy 90% spell damage. And then just life and res, life and res. And the rest of the PoB is pretty similar. Now, this is level 94. If you're not level 94, I'd probably cut this out. Now, this does help with the projectiles attacks, things like Adzir, for example. But the league mechanic, a lot of it is melee, so if you're doing the league mechanic, this is actually kind of bad. But if you're not really doing the league mechanics, what you could drop is Quickstep, because this is the other thing that I got. Now, why Quickstep is because this is a Trapper build. Trapper builds walk around a lot of the time, right? Unlike miners that have to sit there and throw mines, trappers can basically throw down their traps and then just keep moving, and the traps are going to detonate and do damage. So move speed is actually really nice. It allows you to just dodge better when you're in boss fights, but it also makes it so you can just run maps faster. So I think Quickstep is pretty good, and it comes with a bunch of chance to spell suppress damage, which gets us to, I mean, I think it's let's see, 40% chance to dodge, spell dodge, but that seems off. I'm not sure why. Something out there seems off. But that's pretty much what we're going to be looking at in terms of the gear for the Seismic Trapper. So again, this damage is plenty enough. You'll be able to do the Feared on this. You'll be able to do Maven within seconds. This damage is very misleading when it comes to Seismic Trap. It's really hard to actually calculate the damage, but as you can see, I believe this is the damage for every one of these small explosions. So every single small explosion is doing 1.2 million damage, and you're putting down 3 traps, and of course we are focusing on increased AoE, and we're also focusing on trap throwing speed, and we are focusing on skill effect duration, which means that our traps are lasting for a very, very long time. Which means that we can actually get like 6 to even 8 traps on the ground, just pumping and pumping and pumping, and every single one of those hits is doing over 1 million damage. So on this PoB, you are going to literally breeze through bosses, and of course, defensive-wise, we're looking at a pretty decent amount of evasion, pretty good amount of dodge, but as an evasion build, you will get one-shotted once in a while. That's just the nature of the game. It is going to rely on, you know, your actual playstyle more so than anything else, whether you stay alive or not, and then manually, you know, not just running into mechanics that are going to be killing your character. So that's pretty much my update on all of the 4 PoBs. Again, link for all of them in the description. Let me know how your League Start has been going, if you've been playing any of these 4 builds, if you dropped any crazy stuff, maybe a Mageblood, maybe a Headhunter, maybe a Mirror. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed. Before I go, as always, I want to say a huge thank you to my supporters. So Kat, Alex, Brandon, Nate, the second Alex, Flame Scorpion, Neroth, Grimoire, the Great Master, Johnny, Thomas Mass, Reese, Tim, Axel, Road to Millions, Edicus, Scott, Stanzarashi, welcome back, and Wolverine, as well as Ronald, Kevin, the third Alex, Bitizen, and Mercury, anybody else who supported me in the past, and anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.